This is the Mentor Moments podcast. My name is Brayton Wooters, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Michael Keener. On Mentor Moments, we take the time to interview counseling professionals and personal mentors. We hope you enjoy this episode and keep tuning in.
All right, everyone. I think every episode is special, but Brayton, we are in store for a huge treat.
So, Mike, who do we have here today?
I know we can't wait any longer. So,
Mike and Brayton, they're the treat.
That's right.
well, I appreciate that we're the treat. But I have two of my former professors from back at the University of Buffalo. That it's just been a pleasure to stay in contact with them for, I guess, 20 years now, and just kind of check in. And I just thought they would have a unique perspective from higher ed and mentoring doc students on this, again, what it takes to sort of mentor in life and career in higher ed, that it would fit well within our podcast. They're both in the counseling field as well. So we have Tom Frantz with us and Jim Donnelly. So just again, this is going to be an awesome episode.
Okay.
All right. So Tom or Jim, which would like to receive the first question? All right, Tom, you're up. We would love to hear a little bit of an overview of your background, a little bit about your career, and kind of how you ended up where you are today.
You want 30 seconds or 5 minutes?
We got all the time in the world. We're ready.
I was in grade school. I had a history teacher who was also a coach, and I liked him a lot. So I thought, I want to be a history teacher and a coach. And that stayed with me through high school. And I applied to a state school in Illinois because I had a scholarship to be a teacher. But my dad saw an article in the Chicago Tribune. He'd never been to college, didn't know anything about it. But it listed the 10 best liberal arts colleges in the country. And the closest one to us was Grinnell, Iowa. He said, I want you to go there. It's a good school. You should go to a good school. So I applied, got accepted, went to Grinnell, went from Grinnell to the University of Iowa for my PhD and master's. But most of my life, I haven't planned ahead very far. I just knew I wanted to coach and be a history teacher. But then I got into Grinnell, and teaching wasn't what they were training people to do. And I wound up getting majoring in math and phys ed, and I applied to graduate schools. The only place that gave me financial aid that admitted me was the University of Iowa, admitted me to their master's program in phys ed. So that's where I went. At the time, I was dating a girl at Grinnell who was a psych major, and she said her favorite course was abnormal psych, which she loved. So I had an elective to take in my phys ed program, and I took abnormal psych. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I wanted to get into psychology. So I applied to counseling psychology at Iowa, got in, graduated, came to the University of Iowa, and taught for University of Buffalo, and taught for 40 years in psychology, counseling really more than psychology. And it was just a good fit. I loved it. I was on the faculty, and I thought faculty life was about as good as it gets.
Can I ask you a question now?
Sure.
And he was the best faculty member ever, but that wasn't all he did, because he also was very active in the community. So I was hoping you might just share a little bit about like life transitions. And
well, there's a whole other side to my career that became almost the most important thing. Without going into too much detail, I had 2 children that were born with congenital birth defects, and they were not expected to live more than a couple of years. They had fantastic surgery by a surgeon here in Buffalo, and then later on they had surgery at the Mayo Clinic. They've done very well. They've had issues, but they're still doing well in their 50s. But that got me interested in death and dying, because we thought we were going to have to get ready. And I took a workshop with Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, who back in the 70s and 80s was a guru of death and dying in our country, and got interested in that, and wound up teaching a course in grief counseling, doing workshops in grief counseling, set up a life transition center in Buffalo that helped people deal with grief, helped start 2 hospices here in Buffalo, Niagara and Buffalo. I really got into the death and dying field and wound up lecturing all over the place on grief and loss. And that became really my specialty and the thing that I cared the most about.
that that's part of my story. When it's my turn, I'll
Maybe it's your
explain.
turn.
Yeah, what a great transition. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up about a mile from where we're sitting, oldest of 5 kids, and I was really happy to hear you start out with family stuff, Tom, because I was thinking I should as well. So oldest of 5 kids, and when I was 12, my dad got lung cancer, and he was a lawyer, and it appeared that we were going to lose him. So I had to kind of grow up and help out quite a bit. Miraculously, he survived lung cancer, which in 1967 was pretty unusual. Yeah, and he had a lot of chronic problems after that, but that sort of pointed me towards. Initially, I thought medicine, but ultimately it was psychology. I went to Allegheny College in Meadville, PA. Lasted about a month in pre-med, and then switched to psychology, and loved it. When I graduated, I had gotten involved in the community a bit when I was an undergrad with kids. Then when I graduated, I was offered a job as director of a delinquency prevention program, which was great. So I did that for a couple of years, and then started thinking about what next. And I found a program in California. The title was very unusual. You probably never heard it before, Public Affairs Psychology. And within that, there were some professors who were doing stuff in juvenile justice and program evaluation and policy development and stuff like that. And it turned out that my advisor at Allegheny, this fits in with your mentoring thing, was a student of the guy who was the chairman of the department at Claremont Graduate University. So he was really encouraging me to do that. And plus that was around the time of the blizzard of 77. So I thought California sounds pretty good. And so I went out there, and I was studying social psychology for a couple of years. I was able to come home for Christmas during my second year. And as you might often see in our house, my mom was ironing and watching this show called AM Buffalo. And I sat down and started watching the show. And this guy came on and started talking about the Life Transition Center. And I said, you know what, Mom? I think that's what I want to do. So I called UB, and Tom wasn't available, but another guy, Jim Hansen, who was a director of the counseling psych program, was, and he encouraged me to apply to transfer. So that's what I was able to do. And then I had really mostly great experiences at UB. I almost didn't want to leave graduate school. It was too good to just keep learning. And I knew I would never know enough, to function in the world. So I had to learn more. But anyways, they kicked me out eventually. And I got a series of jobs that all were related to my interest in health and well-being and psychology, including at Roswell Park Cancer Institute, where I was a medical psychologist. And then in my last couple of years at Roswell, I had probably my best job title ever, which was quality of life research scientist. And I got involved in national clinical trials, and my focus became quality of life studies, and I learned a lot about statistics and research methods, which I was already interested in. And meanwhile, Scott Meyer, who was, at UB, asked me to teach research methods as an adjunct. So I did that. And, so I was kind of back home in the old department. And then eventually an opening appeared, and they somehow let me come back. And so I was there for 11 years. And then I went to Hospice Buffalo for a year, and then Canisius University, formerly college, for 14 years. So, and that's where I kind of am still.
Well, Brayton knows I like to throw out the term planned happenstance a lot, right? Yeah. That we plan so much, but then these chance events happens and we capitalize them. So if it wasn't for a girlfriend or a trip back home to AM Buffalo, and like who knows how our paths would have veered different ways. So I don't know, just hearing that just it excites me.
Yeah, I think that happens so often. Some little event changes your whole life.
Yeah,
you're right about that, Mike.
A little bit of a a disclosure statement. Brayden and I have had a few conversations about him starting a PhD program too. So I know we'll get into that in the later on, but maybe now that you have sort of a real person to see, that maybe some of this advice about our life in higher ed we can do some on the spot mentoring. It's like intervention. We can have an intervention with you, right?
Oh my, yeah. Well, I don't think I quite prepared the questions for that yet, but maybe a second episode we can chat some more about that journey. So when both of you, reflect on that journey that you've had in your careers, how would you say mentors have impacted your life? Maybe we can start with Tom.
I thought about that a little bit, seeing your question, and my first reaction was, I'm not sure I know how they did it all. I think I would maybe use the term influence, or when I was a student, many of my faculty members and teachers all along the way I looked up to. I thought they were very knowledgeable, very on top of things, knew much more than I would ever know, and was totally impressed by them. And then all of a sudden, I'm a faculty member, and I know that I don't know anything at all as much as these faculty did. And yet students are looking up to me as if I'm supposed to know something. And I was very young when I started as a faculty member. I was 25, got my PhD early. I knew I didn't know that much, but the students kept assuming I did, and many of them are older than I was. And so it's almost like the imposter syndrome. You sort of play the role because you're supposed to, but deep down this is all a fake here. But then after a while, you do it long enough, and you become what you. The faculty that influenced me, the teachers that influenced me, I think about their competence. I don't think that they said anything to me in particular or singled me out. They just exhibited a confidence about what they did, a caring about what they did, an enthusiasm about what they did. They liked statistics, they liked history, they liked counseling. They were enthusiastic about it, and that rubbed off. I think that no one ever took me under their wing and mentored me in a classical sense, but they certainly influenced me a lot by who they were.
Exactly. Because my response is, I want to be like him. That's I never can be, but that's the model. Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Tom, about it's, looking at the competence and caring and enthusiasm. And I thought about a guy who I had as my statistics teacher at Claremont. I'm still in touch with him, believe it or not. He had started out as a kindergarten teacher, but he was a fantastic teacher, just fantastic. And I remember one time I had a friend come visit me, and he stayed for a long time. And he was a real outdoorsman. He was taking me in the desert and mountains and the beach and all over the place. And I got kind of behind in my studies. And I went to see this guy, and he said, "That's okay. Just, you can have an incomplete and we'll pick it up next year." And that was all there was to it. And then he turned out to be, not only such a kind, compassionate person, but such a great teacher. So he really influenced how I tried to be in the classroom, and also interact with people who are having trouble, which, that turns out to be part of life.
But I was thinking about the imposter syndrome, and a little story that I used to tell some of my students once in a while. There was this guy who was he was an evil person. He was not nice. He was a criminal, but he fell in love with this young girl, and he knew that she wouldn't give him the time of day because he was known to be this horrible person. So he had to disguise himself, and he developed a mask, which he put on his face, and he started courting her, and he started acting nice and behaving well, and she fell for him, and they fell in love, and they got married, and he was totally happy, but he had to wear the mask because he knew if he ever took the mask off, she would realize who he was and get rid of him. So after many years, he finally decided he just couldn't wear the mask anymore. And he finally took it off, and his face had become just like the mask, and he didn't look any different with the mask off than with it on, and she never knew the difference, and they lived happily ever after. So that's the
Yeah.
imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It maybe works to fake it for a while.
Yeah. It's learning. Everything is learning, right? And you know, taking advantage of the opportunities that come along, modeling yourself after the kind of person you want to be, even if you're not quite there yet. That's a great story.
And I think there's maybe a small danger in ever getting to the point where you realize I've arrived. I know what I need to know. I'm it now. I don't know that you ever really get there. If you start thinking that way, you maybe lost something, because there's always room to learn more, grow more.
Right.
Some new experience comes along, no matter how long you've been at it.
I'm having like flashbacks, you know, like this is, I'm just thinking about classes and interactions in offices, and like remembering the first time I met Dr. Frantz. I was completed my undergrad, and it was at interdisciplinary studies, and I was working at the child care center on South Campus. That was my job, and I sort of knew I liked that job, but there was more, right? And I walked over or drove back over to the other campus, and that's when Dr. Frantz was department chair. Is that the term that we used, right? And we had school counseling and rehab counseling, and I don't know if I want to be a school counselor. And so again, we just sat and had this sort of moment, and we just kind of connected. And so Dr. Frantz, you're the one that sort of again guided me to become a rehabilitation counselor, and just sort of, again, this way of being present, thinking of supervision class. Like I don't know, it might have been a class at 7:00 one night. And there was always a bunch of us that would just sort of go have dinner together, then get ready to go to class and sort of be one with us as a class, as a team. And then I think I don't know if it's the opposite end, but whenever I see Jim, right? He's covering his mouth now, so I know you can't see it, but he seems to always have a smile on his face, right? And his energy and enthusiasm for whatever he's teaching is just sort of contagious. And so, like I try to take both of those things in the classroom. So how can I be present and really be with the students and where they're at, and show that I care, but then equally this is so exciting. I'm glad we're here together. This is for you. Like, okay, let's take this idea and where can we go from it? So I know maybe this is a counseling moment for me right here. I don't know. Maybe it's my intervention, Brayton.
Well, I was just saying, maybe it's mine too, because everything that you're sharing are things that I've seen, right? You're sharing these like moments of being in the classroom, but I was the one in the seat. I was the one that was watching it. And so it's just such a cool thing to see, just generationally, and to see the trickle down effect, because it's influenced my ability to be a counselor and to affect change. So this is just a very cool moment.
All right. Well, can I follow up on what Mike was saying? Because when I was thinking about this discussion we were going to have, I was remembering a specific time when we were in research methods. Mike, I can just picture right where he sat, and the first row, you were about halfway back, and we were talking about something that doesn't usually inspire that much, joy, probably like construct validity or something, and you were smiling, and so that I think we connected there, and so I was kind of thinking, how do we summarize that into a point about mentoring? I was thinking, look for a spark, in somebody. And then try to amplify that, and I kept thinking about other students who, like, whether it was in a class or just meeting in the office or something, and they would start talking about something that they care about, and then you try to help them figure out how to build on that.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say that I think Jim is one of the most positive people I've ever known. Every time I see him, we get together for breakfast a few times a year, and he's just always positive, always has a positive attitude. I don't know what it takes to become like that in public, but in public, he is the most positive person I know.
Oh, thank you. Well, maybe I'm still trying to turn that mask into something permanent. But thank you, guys. Yeah, I guess that's really kind of leads to another thing I was thinking about is look at what we get to do, right? I mean, it's pretty fun if you think of it that way. I mean, it can be, and it is a lot of work, but it's good work, right? And there's so many other things are difficult in life, but to do this kind of work is just great.
Well, I think that's where it ties into my rehab background, that, vocation is such, a major life identifier and a sense of purpose and fulfillment that yeah, you're right, Jim, that when you find that thing, right, it does uplift and increase well-being. So so I guess do you think there are key characteristics of effective mentors and or teachers? Let's throw a little curveball in there.
Well, one thing that comes to mind, of course, we're generally in the field of counseling, psychology, the helping professions, rehab counseling. And I do think that there's a little bit of difference in teaching in that field versus, say, statistics or engineering, and that is that there's an academic side to all PhDs for sure. But in our field, there's a personal side, there's a therapeutic side, and the graduate, I think, needs to be well versed in the academics and the research and that sort of thing. But ideally, you have let's say, a personality or an ability to care about other people that is almost essential for our field in the helping professions. That isn't in all fields. I mean, it's nice, but it's almost essential in our field. So that we have to relate to our students as faculty on two levels, the academic and the cognitive, and you got to pull your weight, but also on the personal. Not that you get into the personal lives of your students, we don't do that often, but I think that as a faculty member, one thing that matters is that you care about your students. They're not just a number in a classroom. You can't just wait to get out of the classroom so you get the research. You do care about the person. If they come up after class and talk to you, you want to stay and wait and talk as long as it needs. You want to connect with them. You want to build a connection. They will be better students for it. You'll be a better faculty for it. They'll listen to you more. There's just all kinds of good things that come when you connect with another person. And I think that connection is valuable when it comes to mentoring. This is maybe a little bit off subject, but I remember, this was probably 60 years ago, seeing a study done at the University of Minnesota about characteristics of PhD students that finish versus ABDs that drop out. And they looked at all sorts of things, but their final conclusion generally was the variable that differentiates those that succeed and those that don't, they call it persistence. They weren't smarter. The ones that graduated weren't necessarily smarter. They just refused to give up. They stuck with it. And that's where I think a faculty member, mentor, can make a difference. To stay with you, to connect with you, to not let you give up. One of the things I used to do with doctoral students working on a dissertation or a research project is whenever we would have a meeting about it, at the end of that meeting, I would set up a time for the next meeting so that they didn't, because when you're doing a dissertation, it's not like a time-bound semester, there's a midterm and final, it's over. It goes on forever, possibly. You have to create your own deadlines, and having deadlines works. So I would create, in effect, deadlines for our next meeting. And there were certain things they needed to do by the next meeting. If they didn't happen to make it, I didn't, read them out, but there was always the goal. There was always the next thing to accomplish. And I think that makes a difference in getting through a program to keep going. Because, it's tough. It takes a lot out of you to be a PhD student. And to have those deadlines, to have the encouragement to keep going and not give up, I think helps doctoral students.
Yeah, so having structure, to your life and your routine, that allows you to kind of take this overwhelmingly big thing and break it down, right, into steps you can take from this meeting to that next one, right? And its advisor has just told you what to do, and you just got to do it. And it's usually not impossible.
And do it by 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, right.
Because otherwise it can go on. And on.
Right. Yeah, this is why one of the reasons why Tom was on 7,000 dissertation committees and why 25,000 people came to his retirement dinner. Or maybe it was 30,000. It was a lot. A lot of dissertations. And also he wrote the guidelines for writing a dissertation that then became general to the whole Graduate School of Education, I think. I think they probably still use them. They should anyways.
I did like working with students. To be honest, we're at a research institution, and I did my share of publishing, but I was always a teacher first and liked working with the students more than I did doing research. That worked for me. Not that it happened all that often, because at the time you're doing it, you're just, at least in my case, I was just doing my job, going to work, doing what I do. But then every once in a while, some student would come up near the end of their time there and say, Dr. Frantz, what you said back so-and-so made all the difference to me. And I think, wow, I didn't even know I did that. And it was so rewarding to get that kind of feedback when I didn't know I was being special. I was just doing my job, And that was always heartwarming to realize that I had an influence that I didn't even know I was having.
Yeah, like when I told you about seeing you on MA in Buffalo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You couldn't have known, right, until we met.
Yeah.
Well, how about another incident? So, as the two of you may recall or remember, my father passed away a month before I graduated.
Yeah.
You also may remember I defended my dissertation in the fall semester and didn't graduate till the spring semester. So my dad he came and saw me defend, and then I was, obviously passed away. But then in one of my meetings with Tom, he said, you only have so much like energy to invest in something, and like maybe this with your father passing, right, gives you an opportunity for something else. And that something else, like the next week, I met my wife, my future wife. So it was just sort of this, I know, like drop the mic. That was just oh my gosh, right? And so again, those moments of just having a conversation that you never know, what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
I still wait, and Tom gave us 2 great knives for our wedding, and they are so sharp as can be. I use them every week, and so you're close to you're close to my mouth because I'm eating a lot. But,
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. That's neat, Mike. Thank you.
This wraps up part 1 of our conversation with Drs. Thomas Frantz and James Donnelly. Stay tuned for part 2 of our episode with Tom and Jim, where we chat some more about careers in academia and hear their advice for our listeners. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Mentor Moments.